Those Candy Kisses You Give. Written by Too Good to Be Bad. Read by Archie. You're probably wondering what is so important that I've called you in here. Dimitri's voice rang out, bouncing off the walls of the palace kitchens. Most of the room was unfamiliar territory to him, what with his lack of cooking experience and taste buds. But hopefully his current companions would be able to guide him in the mysterious art of cooking. Ashe nodded. I was rather surprised when I received the summons, Your Majesty. You are aware that the Archbishop is out on official church business, yes? Of course, Ashe replied. Knights never forget their schedules. Dimitri chuckled. Good. Then you are also aware that she is expected to return in Fhirdiad tomorrow afternoon. I think you can see where this is going. I think so. Maybe. With a sigh, Dimitri folded his arms across his chest. I would like to cook a meal for my wife when she returns to the palace. Unfortunately, I am woefully inexperienced when it comes to the kitchen, and you seem to know a whole lot more than I do about cooking. Ashe's green eyes lit up. Oh, that's a splendid idea. I think Dudu would have been more suited. I'd ask him as well, but as you know, Mercedes just gave birth, and I loathed to have him leave her side, especially for a task as trivial as this. I don't think it's trivial, Ashe shook his head. It's a great idea, but if I may ask, what brought this on? My undying love for my wife. The corners of Ashe's mouth twisted into a tiny frown. I mean, of course, but why? Huh? Dimitri faltered. I'm not sure. There were a lot of things, like being away from his wife for 2 weeks, which wasn't really that long, all things considered, but he'd gotten used to her presence and all that entailed. Her good morning kisses, her tiny smiles throughout the day, her warmth when they cuddled at night. Saints, he could feel his face warming just thinking about the Archbishop. I wanted to do something nice for her when she returns. I was initially at a loss as to what to do, but then I heard you and Ingrid have taken to cooking together, and Ashe let out a valiant attempt at a dignified squeak. You know about that? Dimitri raised an eyebrow. Of course I do. What sort of king would I be if I didn't know what was happening in my own palace? Anyway, as I was saying, I heard that you and Ingrid cooked together, and I thought it was a wonderful idea. It's appealing, you know? The notion of making something with your own hands for the person you love. That's not what that is, Ashe insisted while a bright crimson settled on his cheeks. We don't, that's different. How so? It just is, Ashe said, as if it cleared anything up. A stilted silence settled in the kitchen. Despite the overwhelming abundance of windows, smoke inhalation was a big deal to the palace designers, it seemed. The air felt stifling and muggy. Ashe simply stared at his boots, immaculately polished as was required of the knights in the palace. Okay, then, Dimitri cleared his throat. I'm sorry I brought it up. Ashe let out a nervous laugh. No, it's fine. I should react better. Will you still help me out, though? Of course, I'd love to help you out, Your Majesty. Which dish did you have in mind? Back at the monastery, we both enjoyed the onion gratin soup. I think she would appreciate that. A bit ambitious, but I like it. Ashe grinned wildly. And I know the recipe quite well. The first step is... Ashe, Ingrid called out and stepped into the kitchen, her eyes widening when her gaze met Dimitri's. Oh, Your Majesty. I didn't realize you were here as well. Hello there, Ingrid, Dimitri smiled. What brings you here? I was looking for Ashe, but if you two are busy... Nonsense, Dimitri waved her over. In fact, you can join us if you like. Ashe was just about to teach me how to cook an onion gratin soup, so that I can cook one for the Archbishop when she returns tomorrow. That's really thoughtful of you, Ingrid said. I think she'd really like that. Thank you, Dimitri began. I got the idea. Ashe turned his head and quickly aimed a pointed glare at Dimitri. Very few things in life could frighten the King of Fargris, but an angry Ashe was so rare that even the bravest of men faltered when they saw it. Because I like the soup, Dimitri finished. Soup sounds pretty great, Ingrid nodded like she had just received some profound wisdom. And just like that, Ashe was all smiles again now that Ingrid was standing beside him. So, Your Majesty, the first step to a great onion gratin soup is to melt some butter in a pot. While it melts, we can chop the vegetables. Onions, shallots, leeks. Surely you have experience chopping vegetables. Right, Your Majesty? Dimitri shook his head. I was not allowed to chop vegetables back at the Officers' Academy. Dudu once told me I chop too hard. Ashe frowned. I think I see how he came to such a conclusion, but let's give it a try anyway. Maybe your knife handling skills have gotten better. How hard could it be? It turned out to be very hard. After an hour of smushing vegetables with his knife, simmering the wine too much, and keeping the soup too long in the oven, all Dimitri had to show for his efforts was something that barely passed as soup. The acrid stench of smoke and charred cheese lingered in the air, and Dimitri could see why whoever designed the palace insisted that the kitchen have so many windows. "It's not the worse for a first try," Ashe said as he picked through the soup with a fork. "You may have burnt the cheese, the bread, and even the soup, but—" "Perhaps I am not meant to cook," Dimitri mumbled. "I even chopped the vegetables too hard." Ingrid scooped out some of the onions, ignoring how they were obliterated beyond belief. "Don't feel so bad, Your Majesty. Ashe is just so skilled at cooking that he makes everything seem easy. Maybe it tastes better than it looks." Ashe scooped up some soup with a spoon and tasted it, only for his face to scrunch up in polite disgust. "I think you added too much salt, Your Majesty." "That is to be expected, unfortunately. It is hard for me to taste things." Dimitri let out a heavy sigh. "I am truly sorry to have wasted your time." Both Ashe and Ingrid shook their heads defiantly. "Not at all," Ingrid insisted. "Your Majesty, we're Fhirdiad born and bred, and we don't give up. Where would any of us be if we gave up just because we didn't get things right the first time around?" "Ingrid's right," Ashe said, his face grim with determination. "We've come too far to let something as simple as a barely edible soup stop us. Besides, if the Archbishop saw how much you were trying to make something nice for her, she'd love it all the same." Despite the irredeemably charred chunks of bread and cheese in front of him, and the faint smell of smoke that still clung to him, Dimitri began to laugh. "You really think so?" "On my honor as a knight," Ashe replied solemnly. "That said, perhaps we could start off with something easier. What other meals did you and the Archbishop enjoy together?" "Aside from the onion soup, she absolutely adored the sagart and cream. She would eat a whole tray sometimes." "I think we can work with that," Ashe grinned. "It'll be much easier than the soup." "My love, do you realize that you're covered in flour?" Violet asked as she strode into the dining hall. Dimitri chuckled and set a tray down on the table. "I do, yes, but I was hard at work preparing something for you." She raised a delicate eyebrow. "And what would that be?" "Sit, and I'll show you." He pulled out a chair for her and sat beside her. Sea-green eyes sparkled curiously as Dimitri lifted the cover off the tray to reveal a perfectly palatable tray of sagart and cream. It was not burnt, the fruits were chopped more or less properly, and the cream seemed to be the right consistency. A tiny smile formed on Violet's face. "You made this?" "I did." "You told me back during the war that you weren't terribly good at cooking," she said. "I had some help," Dimitri admitted, "from Ashe and Ingrid." "I heard they started cooking together." "I heard the same thing." A light giggle escaped her, and it sounded like music to his ears. "And how much practice did you have?" "They gave me a quick lesson yesterday while you were away, but this right here," he gestured to the tray, "I made it all myself. For you. It explains the flour, yes. I may have been too vigorous in attempting to open one of the sacks." She laughed again. The sound of it was warm and settling in his chest. That familiar fuzzy feeling was back, and Dimitri could feel his cheeks warming. "I always did like sagart and cream," she said softly. "And I like that you liked them." He chuckled sheepishly. "I hope you find this one to your liking, then." "Come now, let's try it together. I'd love for you to share this with me." Spoons in hand, they each took a bite. The complete and utter lack of taste was nothing new, but seeing her expression light up as she took a bite was more than enough for him. "What do you think?" he asked. "It tastes delicious. Thank you for this." "Anything for you, my beloved." She smiled again and said, "You have some cream on your face." "Where?" he asked. The only answer he got was the press of her lips against his own, and for a moment Dimitri could taste the sweetness.